Welcome to the show, Lacey. I'm so excited to have you here for another episode of Women of the Military podcast. So, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. Happy to be here.
So, let's start with why did you decide to join the military?
Ooh, a big one. So when I joined, it was in 2005, so very close to 9/11. Um, to be honest with you, I had joined the reserves a year before, at 18, and my mom convinced me not to ship. And so I didn't, and I did my high school year and went to college, dropped out after a semester, and was really, really sick. Couldn't go to work for like 10 days. I was working at Lowe's at the time, and I couldn't go to work for 10 days. So I wasn't getting paid, and I didn't have any insurance, the first taste of being an adult, not living at home. And my friend who I lived with at the time, she was kind of seeing a recruiter. And she came in, and I'm like so sick. I'm like laying on the floor of our apartment, and there's no furniture. And I'm just like, I have strep throat. And she walks through. She's like, "Hey, I think I'm going to join the army. Like, nothing's going on here." And I just like kind of rolled over and was like, "Yeah, when are you meeting with them? Because nothing's going on here for me either." And so, I'd already thought about it a year before, and active duty just seemed like the way to go. You get health insurance. They kind of still take care of you like mom and dad would, but you have that little taste of independence like college. So I was like, yeah, let's just go for it. Nothing's going on here. I'm tired of my little small town in Indiana. Um, and then we joined under the Battle Buddy program.
Oh, cool. So,
Yeah.
you already kind of had a inclination toward joining the army, and then your mom talked you out of it, probably because she was concerned. I mean, post
Yeah.
9/11, it was a little scary time. And
Was.
so you did that, and then you did the Battle Buddy program, which I've heard of, but can you like walk us through what that experience was like?
Yeah. So we joined together. We shipped at the same time to basic training. We went to the same basic training. We were in the same platoon, even. I don't think that happens for everyone, but it worked out for us. So we had the same MOS as well. We were both air traffic controllers, 15 Quebec. And that was interesting too, because you had to pick a job that both of you wanted. So it's like a little bit of teamwork there. Then we both went to the same AIT, and you're supposed to go to the same first duty station as well, but my paperwork kind of got messed up because of my previous enlistment, and she got assigned to Korea, and I got assigned to Hawaii for our first thing. So we were like separated our whole careers, actually. Very interesting. Not supposed to happen that way, but it did.
Yeah, I think I've heard from people who've talked about the Battle Buddy program is like, this is how it was supposed to go. And like somewhere along the way, something gets messed up. But at least you got to be in basic and AIT together. And then by then, I mean, you're in a unit. A lot of people are brand new. So what was it like? I mean, what was it like to go through basic training and AIT? And then we can talk about your first assignment.
Oh, basic training. I loved it. I was like obsessed with In the Army Now with Polly Shore at the time. And be all that you can be, but they had just changed the motto to Army of One. Very interesting. Um my basic training was the last to have BDUs. And we got issued BDUs and ACUs. Very interesting. I just loved it, to be honest with you. And then I was nervous to go to AIT because I guess most people don't know what to expect there. Like the movies aren't stereotyping AIT. But that was very similar. It was a nice interim between, being full-time active duty and the basic training. So you had kind of those two vibes going on. We were there long enough that our AIT was 4 months. So we were there long enough that we got to go into phase 5+. And so we could go off post and like wear civilian clothes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that like AIT is kind of like a pseudo, like a mash between both. And you think, oh, I finally graduated, I have all this freedom. And then you get to AIT, you're like, oh, no, not really. And then, but you go through those phases and you get to gain more freedoms as you go through it.
Yeah, they really break you down and build you back up.
I mean, that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah, and that's interesting that they were like, "Here's some BDUs that you'll wear at training," and then here's yeah, and they're like, yeah. I guess that's what happens when they transition to. I mean, they need as an enlisted person, you get issued your uniform, so if you have to wear them, then they need to give you both. But it's like that's crazy.
It
I
is.
was in as the Air Force was switching, and when I did my college ROTC, we were in BDUs, and that was my uniforms when I first started, but they don't issue officers new uniforms, and so it was like I had to buy new uniforms even though I just paid for the BDUs. It was like
Uh,
I did not like it. Yeah.
yeah, that's not great.
Yeah. So, yeah. Oh, well, that's life. So, you went through the training. It sounds like basic training and AIT were, like, both a really good experience, and then you guys found out that you were gonna be separated, so what was that like? Were you disappointed? And, I mean, you're also going to Hawaii.
Yeah, I wasn't that disappointed because I was going to Hawaii. Um, yeah, I kind of got held back a little bit in AIT because I had sprained my ankle on a like during a PT test, so I had to stay a little bit to, heal and then pass it. So she had left before me. So that was kind of a little, sad, but my whole class ended up going to Korea and I was kind of thankful that I went to Hawaii. Um, Even though I ended up deploying within 6 months of getting there.
Wow, that's really interesting that so many people went to Korea and that you were supposed to be with your friend and you went to Hawaii. That's, like, really funny. So so you got to Hawaii, you got in process, like, how quickly after arriving did you find out that you were deploying?
Pretty much like as soon as I was in reception, like they were like, "Yeah, your unit's deploying." Okay, yeah, but I didn't know exactly when we were deploying until it was probably about a month or so. I think I got there in December. Oh no, it was only like 2 weeks really. I got there right after Christmas, 2 days after Christmas in December of 2005, and then I got to my unit in January of 2006, and they were like, "We're deploying in July." Okay, cool.
And where were you going?
Iraq.
Alright, so what was I mean, I'm guessing that when you got to Hawaii, you guys were spinning up, getting ready, like, there's all kinds of stuff going on, getting ready, like, and you're trying to learn your job at the same time, so I'm sure that 6 months flew by, and then all of a sudden you were on your way to Iraq. So what
Yeah.
was that like?
We had the 6 months as air traffic controllers in the army. I joined at this weird time where they kind of got all of the air traffic controllers in the military out of the towers stateside because we were deploying so much. And then they filled them with, DoD contractors and things. So at that time, we weren't able to really learn how to do our job until we did deploy. So I was very thankful that we were going to do that because like this is what I signed up to do. But getting ready for deployment was a whole lot of like unloading tricons, which are like big, you know, for people. Well, I think everyone listening to this probably knows what a tricon is. Um,
No, probably not.
okay. Well, it's just like a big storage container. Unloading tricons and loading them back up and then unloading them and loading them back up because, I was only a POC at the time. So I didn't understand that we were like taking inventory of things and like what it really took. I just followed orders.
Yeah.
um, but then I did get to go on one field mission before we went to NTC in California, and I was able to earn a rating there, a little tactical rating. That way, I could get started, like have a little leg up when I got to Iraq. When I went to Iraq, I went to Tal Afar, which is like northern Iraq near Mosul. Um, I was one of I was the only female and 7 males. Stayed like in my little remote unit. So that was very interesting, and that place overall had not very many females. So like every time we would go into the DFAC, or the dining facility, like you could hear the rustle and bustle like kind of stop because like women were so rare there at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was, yeah, I mean, women aren't very common in the military. And then if you're at like a remote place, there's even less women. Like when you're at like a big base, like I would go to Bagram and there was like, a lot more people. So then there's a lot more women, even though they're still a minority. But then at the FOB, it's like you could count the number of women on the FOB on your hand because there weren't very many. So yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly how it was.
Yeah. Yeah. So, did you have a good support network from the 7 guys that you were with, or did you face any challenges in that arena?
That was very interesting. I felt very protected by them. My platoon sergeant actually like had I'm going to call it a family meeting, where it was just a meeting where it's like, this is your sister in arms, there's not that many females, like you need to look out for her as well. Like, I want you to treat her like she's, a brother or a sister to you, basically. So I felt like I had a good support network there. But it was off-putting because I would just be like eating, you know, it was a lot of at the dining facility or just like when you're working out. But really, I'm just like trying to eat my food and just like random guys like coming up trying to like talk to me like, oh, I heard you on the mic or I saw you here. And I'm like, what is happening? I'm not. And then so like they would put me in the middle of the table to make it real awkward for them. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was in Afghanistan, people would just, like, come up to me and, like, talk to me, and I was like, same thing, like, at the dining facility, they would be like, because I would go off base, so I had, like, a combat shirt, and they were like, "How did you get that?" And I was like, "Well, I go off base," and it's like but the guys were wearing them too, and so but maybe it was, "Why do you have that?" I don't know, it's kind of interesting, so I can
Wait.
see that dynamic.
Too.
Yeah. I remember one time someone came up and, like, touched my arm, and I was like, "Why is a stranger touching me?" But I was like, "This is not okay." So, yeah, it's it's an interesting dynamic, so, yeah. But you got to learn your job, and you got to do your job, which is I mean, it makes sense, like, you guys were deploying so much, the Army was, like, deploying, so they were like, "We can't just have no one in the air traffic control
Yeah.
tower."
Yeah, because they're like a lot of those have civilian aircraft that come through as well. So they still have to keep it manned. And then, there's the reserves that stay at the airports and things. So it was a problem. So they had to come up with a solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how long were you in Iraq?
That's an interesting one. So I'm going to give you a little bit backstory. I was in Iraq long enough to earn 2 CTOs through the FAA, which is a control tower operator rating to become an air traffic controller, and those take 6 months. Um, I was in the unit that got extended, the first unit that got extended. So I was there for 15 months total, which was very interesting because we were there and it was like, all of a sudden we're like, hey, we have 3 months left. And then we're getting these reports from like the married people that like, hey, my wife is telling me that that we're getting extended. And it was like on the news in America before we were ever told that we were getting extended. So it was like a week later, we have a battalion meeting and they're like, oh yeah, you got extended. So what was 3 months was now 6 months. That was really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I read Laura Colbert. She wrote a book about her experience in Iraq, and she talked about like they were like counting down the days and then they extended. And I think they got extended multiple times, and it was always like it wasn't even like 3 months. It was like they were in the final like 30 days and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, you're not going home yet." And it was at the when they finally left, they just were like in the trucks and they were like, "Are they going to tell us that we can't leave?" Because they just and their morale, like it really
Yeah.
took a beating on their morale.
Yeah, that's like you can't be doing that to people. It's mentally tough. Like really mentally tough.
Yeah. I
Trying to get home
mean,
to families, yeah.
yeah, she had like a whole trip planned coming home because they were that close to getting home, and then they had to cancel everything because they didn't go home. And yeah, it was really hard. And I feel like even worse, like the fact that like they're talking about it on the news in the United States and like family members are hearing about it and you guys are in Iraq and you're like the families are like, "Are you sure you're coming home because this is what the news is saying?" And you're like, "What? I didn't know that cuz you only have the AFN network." So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and we were like, "No," and then they would try to yeah, it was just like they were trying to be like, "No, we haven't heard that. No, don't get all riled up yet," because we're people get disgruntled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really hard. So you were supposed to be there for a year and you stayed for 15 months.
Yeah, and I ended up getting an Article 15 while I was there. So that's a whole story in itself. I took my R&R within 3 months of getting there. So because I got that Article 15, I ended up not being able to take any 40 passes to go to like Qatar because that's what they kind of offered us. Because I was flagged, and so I went like an entire year with no day off. Yeah. But my Article 15, I'm sure everybody wants to know now.
Yeah, they do.
um, I was just, a young, dumb kid. I didn't understand really kind of what I was doing and the implications of what that was. And my girlfriend, girl slash friend, who came to visit at one of the fobs because she was the commander's driver. Um, she like, wanted me to take a picture of her where she like flashed the camera for her boyfriend. Cool, not a big deal. This is before, like smartphones really. um, it's not like we hadn't seen each other like naked before. It wasn't a thing, right? But I took that picture. She put it on a flash drive, and while she was on her R&R, someone had taken it off her computer, and it got distributed. So then I basically got in trouble for manufacturing, and distributing pornographic material in Iraq.
When it yeah. When it wasn't even
Like that.
yeah. Well,
But
and I mean, they punish you with Article 15 like that's the military, they do that. But like to then when you're in a war zone and you get extended like 3 months and to be like, "Well, remember you made this mistake way over here and it's already in your record, but we're
yeah,
going to punish you." Like I feel like the morale aspect of that is one of the challenges. I feel like sometimes the military it's like, "Come on, like they're in a war zone. You
yeah,
took your R&R at the beginning of the year."
yeah. And I was on extra duty for 30 days as well. So I was working shift and then doing extra duty. Um, it was, yeah, it was challenging, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's all you can say, but that would be really hard. And I mean, you were like, I already got punished for it. And then,
It felt like more than just the one punishment because
right,
then I wasn't unflagged immediately. It was kind of like a whole thing. Um, getting awards
right.
was a thing. So, yeah, it felt like more than just one punishment.
Yeah. Especially, yeah, that's really hard. I'm sorry to hear that. And, oh, your cat's making an entrance.
Hey, bud.
My cat does that sometimes too.
Can you find your lasso, please? Thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah, so that sounds really hard. So you were in Iraq, took your R&R at the beginning, and then your time got extended and you never really got a break after.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I was young,
So
so
you were younger.
it's like I can
Just a
handle
little. just a little bit.
Yeah.
So, coming back from the deployment, what was your morale state in that? I mean, yeah, what was your morale state and what was it like going forward?
I'd like to say I'm a really resilient person. Pretty cheerful still. Bounced back from it. Like it wasn't the end of the world for me. But coming back was a shock because I think I got so used to, being around these people and like being so tight knit that everybody kind of goes their way. People go back to their families, and then there's this separation that you kind of have to get used to again. And then the world had changed, I'm sure that happens for everyone, but like before I deployed, there was no such thing as an iPhone. And after I deployed, everyone had an iPhone, and texting was, you had to be unlimited. Like it wasn't a thing before. So I was like,
Yeah.
what is this?
Yeah, I mean, technology was changing so much during that time, and, like, I know you were like people are like, "How do you not know what was going on in the States?" It's like, we didn't know what was going on because like, you had internet on your computer, but, like, it wasn't the same, I don't know, it's just so different. Like, I never went to news websites to, like I just and now I'm like, I would get my news from the AFN, and so it was like our own tailored news that was I don't know, it was very different than what and even, like, when I would go on Facebook, it was like people back home were dealing with something so different than I was that it was like I didn't even like going on Facebook because A, I
Yeah,
got to see all the stuff I was missing, and so then I was even more, detached from, you know
agreed. You
yeah.
try not to like think about what you're missing back home and stay focused on what you're doing, I think.
Yeah.
Um, Plus back then Facebook wasn't what it is now. There wasn't that much news going on there.
No, it was just updates of family and friends, like, there wasn't news, it was and there were not really company it was so different, you're right, it was what it was I liked it then.
A little simpler.
Yeah, it was a little simpler, time was different, but
Yeah,
yeah. And you went to Hawaii and you were single, right? So you didn't have, like, a family to come home to, and then, like, you lost that community. I remember because I was an individual augmentee, and then I went to New Mexico, and a bunch of people went to South Carolina, and I was like, "Wait, now I have to go through this, like, transition back into the real world by myself?" I've always had people that were going through it with me because I was deploying and preparing. So
yeah.
what was that like?
That was like the first time for me since I had joined the military. Yeah, that I had really been separate, experienced that. Um, and that's a transition in itself. I feel like I went through a little bit of a depression. Um, I was kind of sick for a little bit. I don't know. It just kind of went hand in hand. Um, and then I won't say I became an alcoholic, but I mean, by definition, like how many drinks you drink and like how often you're drinking, I was starting to find, um, I guess, trying to get relief through alcohol. And when I started to realize that, I like just quit alcohol altogether because I'm like, this is not a solution for me. I'm just drinking my problems away at this point. Um,
Yeah.
it's alcoholism is a thing in my family, so I can like recognize it. And I just didn't want to go there. And so I was like, all right, something else. And I just found, for me, I found a man and a new group of friends, and tried to focus on finding a new group, really, I think is what really helped pull me out of that.
Yeah, finding that community and, getting involved with the other people. Were you living in the dorm, so there were other people around, or how did you connect with other people?
Yeah, so I did live in the barracks, but for me, those were like dungeons, like that's what I would call them. So like I said, I found a man. I found I found a place to stay. Uh, and um yeah, because when I was at the barracks, that's what just like people like to do is drink as well. And I couldn't be it's a pretty big culture, I think, in the military to drink. So I just had to find my group of people that weren't like that.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think it's funny. I was like, the Air Force calls it dorms and the Army calls it barracks. And I'm like, that just sounds like not as happy.
Not as happy, hun. Like, have you seen the have you seen the Army's barracks?
I haven't ever seen them. I've just heard stories.
Yeah, like just even in Iraq, the Air Force living quarters versus the Army's, I was like, okay, I definitely joined the wrong branch here, guys.
Yeah, I deployed with the Army, and the first day I was in Afghanistan, the one of the ladies in the bathroom was like, "Why are you out here?" And I was like, "I deployed with the Army," and she's like, "Oh, oh," because yes, Air Force barracks, even in a war zone, are very different. And yeah, I experienced that too. I know what that's like, and I know how different it is. Because when
Yeah.
we got released back to the Air Force, we were so happy to be in the Air Force building. The little things.
Yes. I think they're making no, I'm not even gonna lie. I don't know if they're making better better ones, but I would hope that they are. I would hope that they're building better situations.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I'm so sheltered. Even though I've done like all these interviews, I've never really talked about like the living situations and how different they are. And I mean, I just experienced it in Afghanistan and I didn't really think about how does that relate to home station. So
I
that's
remember
really
being
interesting.
so curious, seeing the Air Force out with the Army is like seeing like a gazelle in the wild. Like, so, we approached the Air Force, we're like, hey, what about this? What about this? What's that? What's this? And I remember them telling me that when they have to get like stationed on an Army base, they get paid extra money
Extra much.
because our barracks are lesser quality. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, they must be.
Yeah. They didn't give us extra money when we were deployed. They were just like, good luck, have fun on your deployment.
Sorry.
But no, it was fine. It was a good experience overall. And I mean, a tent is still a tent, but there is still a difference. There were a little niceties at the Air Force side.
A
So
little more perks.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you were able to find your friends and you found a man to help, take your mind off your troubles. And then how much longer did you stay in the Army? Did you move or did you get out?
Oh, well, I actually did another deployment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the sign of the times.
Yeah. So I stayed in Hawaii. My whole first enlistment was in Hawaii. Yeah. Um, I deployed again. One of my friends, I will get there later, but made some nice friends during that time. Ended up going back to the same place in Iraq. So was very familiar with that airfield, but we were the last ones out this time. And I'm going like this because we were not the last ones out, but we're the last ones who officially got like orders as a whole brigade, I guess you could say. Um, we handed it over to the civilians, the tower to the civilians. We were training the Iraqis, the Iraqi Air Force, that deployment. So that was a really cool experience. I think I just really liked being deployed, and it was like basic training. It was just like a little simpler life. Like I said, you just focus on what you got to do. And then after that deployment, um, I ended up getting pregnant with, uh, that's kind of a complicated story, but I ended up getting pregnant, and this was during the drawdown, and I wanted to like reenlist, and we only had so many slots. during that time. Um, and so I waited too long basically and didn't get it one of the slots. And then because I was pregnant, I was like, well, if I go to the end of my enlistment, like I won't be able to fly and get to my house, where I'm going to live. So I ended up getting out like a couple months early, just so I could fly. And then, so I was pregnant, married at the time to my current husband, and a military spouse. So I became a military spouse and I became a stepmom all in that one marriage, and I was pregnant at the same time. So
A lot of changes.
a lot
A
of change.
big transition.
Yeah. Yeah. Very big. And just moving from Hawaii to Alabama was a transition in itself too, because you get all this extra pay being and when you make extra money, you spend extra money and you get more bills. And so it was like downgrading. Um, and then I also didn't have a job because I was out of the military. Um, that one was really hard. That transition was really hard. I did not know what I was getting myself into. I didn't think it was going to be that difficult. Not knowing anyone, feeling kind of at a place with the other military spouses because I was a veteran. Not kind of like bitter for just being recognized as a dependent. Um, sad because I lost all of my, battle buddies, and like also, you're not moving your body as much, I think, when you get out because the military keeps you in shape and you're outside and all of those things kind of stopped. So that was a really tough transition for me. And
Yeah.
my husband ended up deploying during that time, and I and I ended up moving in with his family for about 6 months in Florida as well.
Lots and lots of transition.
Yes.
Yeah. I had a really hard transition out, and I feel like you were gonna re-enlist and then it didn't work out. And like I chose to get out of the military, but it was like more for my family. I really wanted to stay in, but I knew that like it just with deployments and being dual military, I was like, this just isn't gonna work. And so there were a lot of like those emotions and then that loss of identity of being a service member and being a dependent. Yes, I can relate to all of that, and then you had even more transition with, like, moving again and living with his family and having a baby, like,
Yeah.
there's, like, a lot going on.
It was a very tumultuous time for me. But like I said, I feel like I'm a really resilient person. I try to find like hold on to my why, and just like keep kind of walking towards that. Um and we were really struggling financially. This was like this is when all the unemployment things were happening. Um President Obama was like kept extending the unemployment. So thank God, President Obama, because it really helped us out. And when that ran out, I was basically trying to get back into the military. Like I didn't want to get out, so I had to wait the 6 months and then wait for the business rules. If nobody knows what that is, you have to when you're prior service, it's harder to get back in. So you have to wait for your MOS basically to open up. And I did. I got back in, thankfully, because we needed the money and I was happy to be doing something again.
Yeah, so you were able to go back in, and were you able to get stationed with your husband?
That was interesting because he had reenlisted for Colorado. And then when I like got back in, they were like, you can only go to Colorado, right? And I was like, oh thank God. But his report date was like a year later. So we had to work really hard to get them to change his orders so he could come there with me. But we worked it out and it was only like 6 months or something that we had to stay separated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's another challenge of dual military life, and especially if your finances are, like, stressed, it's like having two households that it's like, wait, I'm working, but this isn't helping our financial situation. And so I'm glad that you were able to shorten the time and get together
Yeah.
quicker.
Yeah. Me too. Whew, I
So
just
what was it?
ask for an
Oh,
answer.
go ahead.
I just don't take no for an answer.
Sometimes you have to. If someone tells you no, you got to find another person who will tell you yes
Yes.
until you've exhausted all your no's. I
Then
mean,
then you have to accept it.
yeah. But I mean, a lot of times people stop at the first no, and there's more people that can help you if you just keep asking. Or,
Yes.
say, you said no, but why did you say no? Because I read the regulation and I don't think you're right. Show
Right.
me how you're interpreting it. So,
Yeah.
so what was it like to go back into the military? Your life was very different. You had gone through a bunch of change and transition. So, what was that like?
Oh, that was really hard because my son was 15 months old and I feel like I was just getting settled in to kind of like being a mom. Um, you know, it did not come very naturally to me. So I was really sad that I kind of was leaving that potentiality behind of, like what I could be and do for my son, and offer him and teach him just being there all the time for him. And then I cried a lot because the day I left, to go to Colorado was the first day he went into daycare. Um, and I was just like a mess. It was an emotional mess. And I was going through like postpartum too, I think, a little bit still. And I just focused on, trying to build a life there and a community there as well. And I was like trying to, get things settled, find a house for us and what the future was going to be. Um, but really, it was very difficult in that this was during the time. Wow, I went through a lot of milestones in the military. This was during the time when um, Congress made the choice or the decision to allow women into combat finally. It's like just the attitudes of the men around me changed. It was weird to see. Um, I'm like, this is not how I was used to being treated, as a sister in arms. It was more like, well, if you want to be equal, you have to meet the exact same standards as a man, and just very hostile towards. And I was like, they didn't understand, I think, that there were women who were already doing it. And I mean, one of the air traffic controllers wasn't Lacey Peterson. I think she was like an air traffic controller. And and I'm like, she was on the front lines. And some of these women can't even get the awards or things because they're not supposed to be in war. So you're taking away from them something that they're already doing. I don't get why it's a problem.
Yeah, I was attached to an infantry unit when in 2010, and I was really annoyed with the whole PR campaign or lack thereof because the way they made it sound when they announced it was like, we're finally going to let women in combat. And then they were like, and we're doing a study. And I was like, why are they doing a study when people are in Afghanistan attached to infantry units, women? Like, that's real world. We don't have to do a study to see if
I
it
know.
works.
It's
Yeah,
been happening, and for many years it had already been happening.
yeah, yeah. And so it's interesting because I just finished. Oh man, I'm escaping but I read a book, um, and I just interviewed her on the podcast. But I'm gonna. She wrote a book about what it was like for women to be allowed to serve in combat aircraft, and it was interesting because there were study after study after study done to try and disprove that it was okay for women to be, even though like during Desert Storm, they it was obvious how much the military needed women. They tried to send the women back, and the commanders were like, no, we need them here. And then, like, combat aircraft, or even not combat aircraft because they couldn't be, but they still had to cross into combat to support. And it took so much, like, lobbying and legislation, and, like, even a new administration came in, and that was, like, the thing that pushed over the change. And it was just really interesting reading that history because it helped me understand more why there was so much drama in women serving in combat, because it was kind of the same thing. Like, women were already doing it, but nobody was talking about it. And when they did talk about it, they were like, "Oh, let's do a study." And it's like, can't we just take the real world results?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And it was interesting because they did the study. I was stationed at Fort Carson. They did the study for the Rangers at that post too during that time, and it just made it even worse. So I was really happy to get out that time because I mean, this was when I had some MST, some military sexual trauma. I was being sexually harassed by my entire like platoon. And when I would try to get help about it, my platoon, the warrant officer in charge told me, and is it okay if I curse? I don't know if it's okay if I curse. So I
well,
don't have,
just bleep out the cursing.
okay, I'll just say what he said, PG.
Yeah.
He told me that when I was trying to get help for it, that not everybody could be a butthole. Right? That if everybody around me was a butthole, I was probably the butthole. And I was like, I am so done with this. And it took another man giving me text messages, group text messages of the way they were talking about me, giving it to my first sergeant. And then they didn't even do anything about it. It was my battalion sergeant major who was like, hey, if you feel uncomfortable in your unit, like you can come work up here. I'm like, yes. When? Tomorrow? Yeah. Please?
Wow.
Yeah. Just
It's
didn't
sad that, like, a unit can be so different because, like, you had someone who sat down the guys in Iraq and was like, "We're a team, you need to take care of her," and, like, they would even, like, make it difficult to get to you at the DFAC and take care of you so that you could have a good experience where you wanted to go back into the Army, and then you went back in and you had such a bad experience and you didn't wanna be in it anymore because of how you were treated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's sad.
Well, and the dynamics of, like, being where the ranger school and the study was happening, and I think that added to it, and especially I think that shows, like, why the lack of the PR campaign highlighting women and what they had done really hurt the military because people didn't understand. Not people in the civilian section, like, people in the military didn't understand if, like, they hadn't I don't know. It seems like if they deployed, they would know because they had been around women, but I don't it just shows, like, what the challenges were and how it made me feel as a woman who had served in combat. It made me really frustrated. I was out of the military, when that law went into place, but I was still, like, really frustrated with how that was dealt with, so
I bet. I bet. Like I didn't see any combat firsthand, but I could only imagine. Like, women just have not gotten the justice they deserve for a very long time.
yeah. We still haven't. We still need that's why we have the podcast. We need to share
Yeah.
our stories. We need to talk about it because not enough people know what women have done. And I've learned so much from doing this podcast, learning history from before I was in the military and realizing how the way that women were treated for combat roles was just, something that they had gone through. Yes, every time a door was open so that women could move forward and serve. And so it seems to just continue, and then we keep breaking barriers and improving the military. So
Yeah.
yeah. So let's talk a little bit I don't want to run out of time because I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing today. And so you could talk a little bit about like your transition out to where you are today. I know there's a little bit of time that passed in those years.
Yeah. Um, so okay, getting out, I got out in 2016 and I was very happy to do that, like I said. I got offered a job at Denver Center and I turned it down because I didn't want to do the shift work. It had been 3 or 4 years being back in the military. And I felt it very important to give my son some stability because he hadn't been getting it. Um, so I got out and I was a bill collector. um, because we had moved to North Carolina, I got a job as a bill collector and I was pretty good at it, but it was just soul sucking. And I was like, okay, I need something else, because I'm not really like I was getting a community. Like that's what that really kind of gave me, and I really enjoyed that. But I wasn't enjoying what I was doing, and so I was like, let me do something else. And I started full-time school for fine arts, and so I was going to school online full time, working full time. And after a couple of years of doing that, I was like, I'm done doing this. Like, we don't actually need this money. So I walked out of that job, was like, I'm not working for anybody ever again. I'm done working for the man. And so just continued doing school, but started like freelancing graphic design, was kind of doing some logos and things, trying to get my feet wet and build my portfolio. And a battle buddy, Megan, reached out to me. We had deployed twice together. And she was like, hey, will you make me a logo for this coaching business that I want to do, Phoenix Rising? And I was like, yeah, cool. And I think I like looked at some sketches or like looked at some ideas and never made a single sketch. And, and it was like 6 months later, she texted me and was like, hey, can you do a logo for this other company I want to do, Elevated Oats? And I was like, yeah. And I'm like, crap, I didn't even do the thing that she asked me to do the first time. So I call her up. I'm like, hey, what? Yeah, I can do that for you. But like, what's going on? I thought you were doing this other business. And she's like, yeah, well, I ended up like having to leave my husband, and that's like a complicated story, but I'm in Alaska now and I'm doing this other thing. I'm gonna make granola. And I'm like, okay, cool. Make her logo. And then I see her online still, she's like trying to build her little brand, or not a little brand, but her little following on Instagram. And I see her online. We've been talking, and she posted some pictures of like different flavors of granola with like these brown craft paper bags. And I'm just like, hey, do you need any labels? And she's like, yeah. And then from there, I mean, we just like talked every day. I think we still talk every day. And this was in 2019. So we started talking every day, and we build this business together. We're trying to elevate other people like we elevated each other, because we believe in community and getting outside, and how that helped us with our mental health. Because during that time, we were both going through a lot, getting out of the military and transitioning our lives.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. So you're co-veteran owned and you're working to make change, and we'll put links to the show notes so that people can find it. But what exactly are you guys doing? Are you still doing oats, or are you doing mental health? I'm a little confused on like what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so we're an Alaskan granola manufacturer, but we focus on a lifestyle brand.
Okay.
So we're all about getting outside and eating healthy. So it's like mind, body, soul. Like we believe it's not just one thing, it's all the things. So we're trying to, give people a healthy snack. We have these little snack packs that are like granola. They have less sugar, and the second ingredient is either a fruit or a vegetable. So a healthy snack that you can just easily take with you outside. And then we also give back around Veterans Day. We like to do like a portion of our proceeds to Mount Sinai because they do alternative therapies for PTSD.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put the links to the show notes so that people can find it. And I feel like I need to go check it out and check out healthy snacks. I need those. So I'm going to go check it out. So I really have enjoyed getting to hear about your experience in the military, but I like to end every interview with what advice would you give to young women who are considering joining the military?
My advice is if you're on the fence about it, there is so much potential. I absolutely love the training that I got. I absolutely love the people that I met. There are some bad experiences, but I feel like you're going to have that in life no matter what. So you could go a different route and you could be scared. Either way, go to college and bad things can happen to you there. My point is like, don't let one bad story or a few bad stories like make that decision for you.
I think that's great advice. And if you're considering joining the military, I have a book called A Girl's Guide to Military Service, which I guess I should have had it so you could see it. But um, it helps answer all the questions that I had when I was joining the military. So you can check that out, and I'll link to that in the show notes as well. So thank you so much, Lacey, for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed having you.
Thanks, Amanda.